Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Glad you're here. New Hampshire was yesterday. We got to break all this down. Now, again, media builds it up as the biggest deal in the world, and then their guy Biden didn't do so well. And now all of a sudden, New Hampshire is meaningless. Off to South Carolina. And we're just going to ignore Nevada next week because Biden's going to blow it there too. Here's what happened. We had Bernie Sanders, 25.9%, Buttigieg, 24.4%, Klobuchar, 19.3%, and then a big drop off there. Warren had 9.3%. By the way, I love the video. The first had it on their Twitter, the first on TV on their Twitter, and it was a video of Warren going to a diner, and there was a big family, like 12 people or so around the table, and everyone ignored her. It was awesome. She rolls in with her paparazzi. She's like 20 deep, and you can just see everyone. We're trying to eat here, right? It's unbelievable. Like, I couldn't imagine living in Iowa or New Hampshire this during election time. It sounds terrible. Get these clowns out of here already. Poor families. The reason they got out of the house was to get away from your TV commercials, and now you're bothering them at dinner. Anyway, so Warren got 9.3. No one at that table. And Biden, 8.4. Oof. Ouch. Okay. First, I want to talk about the state of the entire race of the Democratic Party, and then we'll narrow it down a little bit here. So this primary right here, this is 1972 for the Democrats. We've made reference to 1984 before. That's when Reagan beat Mondale in the Electoral College vote. Remember, you need 270 Electoral College votes to win. Reagan had 525 to 13. Mondale won Minnesota and D.C. That was it. So we've referenced that a few times, but there was another blowout 12 years prior to that. Nixon won 520 Electoral College votes, and it was McGovern who won 17. He won Massachusetts and D.C. That was it. Now, Reagan won 58% of the vote. Nixon actually won 60% of the entire popular vote, so they kind of wash out, right? Reagan got a few more Electoral College votes, but Nixon got higher percentage of the popular. Anyway, the Democratic race is just like 1972. Sanders is McGovern. Too radical for the party leadership's in just full-on panic mode, and rightfully so. We'll talk about that later. Hubert Humphrey, he was the vice president. So he was just like Biden. So he was the assumed leader early on, the establishment pick. But he just couldn't do anything, couldn't make anything happen. He ended up winning 5 states. Maybe Biden will win 5 states. Trump the other day called him 1% Joe. He had such a good line. He said, I call him 1% Joe. You can never get more than 1%. Biden's been doing this for 47 years. He's never won a primary. So he probably won't even get to 5. And there's no guarantee he's even going to win South Carolina. But Trump said, he's 1% Joe. He had 1% until Obama came in and picked him off the top of the trash heap. So anyway, Humphrey, 5 states. No one could get a lead. George Wallace was from Alabama. He won 10 states. The senator from Maine, he won 5. There's a couple other people who won a couple other states. So it was just this big muddled mess. And then, even more parallel, Humphrey dropped out, which Biden will have to do soon. And the establishment said, we can't go with McGovern. How about this guy? So they brought up Scoop Jackson, awesome name, a senator from Washington. And he didn't do anything either. So that would be like this election's Bloomberg, who has no real supporters. Like, does he even have rallies? Does anyone even go to a Bloomberg rally? So the party was left with McGovern. Don't you see the same thing happening today? And just no one's excited about anyone. The day before the primary, and I guess the morning of, all the headlines were about how no one in New Hampshire can make up their mind, which is really a way of saying, I don't like anyone. I don't like any of these choices. You've been to a restaurant and you're looking at the menu and nothing looks good. Nothing looks good at all. You're like, I don't know. It's not like these people can't make up their mind because they're so excited about all the candidates they get to choose from. It's not like they're at the Cheesecake Factory where you're so excited about like 1,000 different things to order. You don't know what to do. They're at a restaurant, there's like 5 things on the menu. And they're all like, one's made of Spam and one's like chicken liver. And you're like, I don't really want any of this. No one likes anyone. And they look at this and they know, and this would be the same if parties were flipped, right? The most important thing is to win. And the most important thing is to beat Trump. So you look at the group through that prism and you're like, well, Klobuchar? Like, none of these people can beat Trump. Trump let some cameras into the Oval Office yesterday. That's what I was talking about when he made that trash heap comment about 1% Joe. He let some cameras into the Oval Office, and he just sat there and just crushed each of them. Just one after the other. He called Bloomberg a lightweight, worst debater I've ever seen. He had a great tweet the other day. So back in the 2016 campaign, he said that Jeb Bush, low energy Jeb, had slow clubhead speed, which is, I think, my favorite insult ever. My favorite insult from Trump is when he said Whoopi Goldberg's in total free fall. That's my favorite insult. My second favorite is slow clubhead speed. But yesterday about Mini Mike, he tweeted out that he has tiny clubhead speed. That doesn't make any sense. But all you think about is how short Mike Bloomberg is now. And called him the worst debater he's ever seen, and says that Mini Mike has no presence, which is true. No charisma at all. So he sent out these tweets afterwards. He said, Steyer. He said, impeachment king Steyer, how did that work out? Spent $200 million, got less than 1% of the vote in Iowa, and only 3% of the vote in New Hampshire. Could it be that something is just plain missing? Not easy to do what I did, is it? That's awesome. Bloomberg, he said, very bad night for Mini Mike. This one's genius. Elizabeth Warren, sometimes referred to as Pocahontas. I love that, sometimes referred to as, is having a really bad night. I think she's sending signals that she wants out. Calling for unity is her way of getting there. Going home and having a nice cold beer with her husband. I'll get back to that in a second. So Trump's just going to sit for the next how many months and just take shots at these Democrats, the 4 or 5 who are left standing. And it's awesome. It's so much fun to watch. It's like the Democrats are making their way through the Wipeout course. You remember that show, Wipeout? I don't even know if it's still on anymore. Not the American Ninja Warrior show, because that would imply that these Democrats are skilled athletes. The Wipeout course is when you take these very uncoordinated people and have them jump on these giant balls and they split their back in half and fall into the water, and it's great. But here's this part of the course. This is the best part of the course. You got to walk along this wall, and these boxing gloves come out and punch you in the face. That's Trump. There's Klobuchar right there. Just boom, right in the face. There's Elizabeth Warren. Pocahontas, boom, right there, falling. That's it. Just pop in the nose, they're done. Just all day. All day long. Trump's just going to do that until they pick their winner. And woe to that guy. In all seriousness, Trump has all incumbents do, but Trump has a massive, just structural advantage being the incumbent. So you got these Democrats who are going from diner to diner, begging people for their votes. Trump had a rally in Manchester, and then on the way back, stopped by Dover to take part in a transfer ceremony of 2 Americans who were killed in Afghanistan last week. This is the ceremony where the back of the C-17 plane opens up and the flag-draped coffins come out, and soldiers with the white gloves carry their caskets so that these men can be taken home. That's the transfer ceremony. This is the ceremony that Trump referenced when, I think it was after Syria. Remember we talked about getting our men out of Syria and just getting out of Afghanistan in general, and he was questioned about that. And it was probably the most genuine moment of his 3 years as president. He was talking about these ceremonies and seeing these families. And these families, they look like they have it together and everything's fine, and then they see the coffin and they see their son or their husband. And Trump tells a story about how they just lose control and they run through the barricades and they jump on the coffin. And I'm certain that seeing these ceremonies truly moved the president, and that's the driving force behind him getting out of these foreign adventures. We've played that clip before. It's a few minutes. We're not going to play it now, but he tells that story, and he's truly moved by it. It's authentic. So I share that for 2 reasons. First, Trump as a president, as the incumbent, he has this structural advantage over these people who are trying to nip at his heels, right? He's busy being president, which has a lot of different aspects to it. And one of that is welcoming home soldiers who were killed in action, right? So you have that authority there. And it's really hard to come up against that when you're Amy Klobuchar. But the second thing is authenticity. None of the Democrats have it, not even close. Here's the deal with all elections, doesn't matter, every election, the number one thing that people are looking for in a candidate, And I'm not saying this is good or bad necessarily. I'm not saying this is what people should be looking for or shouldn't be looking for. I'm just saying this is what is. The number one thing that people are looking for is authenticity. That's it. Trump has it. Bernie has it. But this was Trump's appeal in 2016. This is why he's a billionaire, right? And Hillary and the media, they tried to paint him as an out-of-touch billionaire, but they couldn't do it. People love Trump. People have always loved Donald Trump. Forget about President Canada, just Donald, the Donald. The TV star, tabloids have always loved him. Rich people have always loved him. Construction workers have always loved him. Cops, garbage men, cab drivers, doormen, they've always loved him because he's authentic. He's the same person all the time to everyone constantly. He's never faking anything. I did a 90-minute interview with Trump during the campaign. It was like right kind of as he was like going through the roof. I did this interview in Trump Tower, and he was the exact same person before the interview, during the interview, after the interview, with the people he knew, with the people he didn't know. He's just the same all the time. He's the same on stage, he's the same off stage, doesn't matter. He's never fakes anything. And people crave that in our inauthentic world, right? This world the last few decades has been characterized by social media and people painting whatever picture they want and being fake in front of people in certain circumstances. In our inauthentic world, people crave authenticity. Wife and I, we watched we watched the last couple minutes of the last debate when they gave their final pitch. And it was my wife who said, what is this? Like, who buys this stuff? The way they recite their answers, it's so hokey and rehearsed and corny. Like, who are you talking to? And what my wife was trying to say is they're being inauthentic. Bernie is authentic. Crazy, but authentic. Trump knows that authenticity is key. This is why, and I hope that Elizabeth Warren wins the nomination. I don't know how she can do it. I don't know what her path is to do this. I hope she wins because Trump's best stand-up bits are against Elizabeth Warren. They're hilarious. So I want more of those. Or at least I don't want her to drop out of the race. But one of the key bops on the nose to go into Wipeout that he does about Pocahontas is for her. A second ago, right? He said, calling for unity is her way of getting there, going home, and having a nice cold beer with her husband. All right? So that's in reference to this Instagram Live that Warren did a couple months ago. Watch this.
Hold on a sec. I'm going to get me a beer. Hey, Glover, my husband Bruce is now in here. You want a beer?
No, I'll pass on the beer for now.
You sure?
Okay.
Okay, say hello to folks.
Yes.
So, this is my sweetie.
Hello.
And I'm crazy.
I love you.
I love you too. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, enjoy your beer.
Who've we got here so far? Skylar, and 14 others. Hello, Denise. Hi. Fortnite. Good to see you. Who else have we got? Kenny, is that right? Kenny and the boys? I'm glad to see you. Is that Greeny Goddess? Wow. That's a name I'd like to have. So, or as my mother always referred to me, the surprise. It's one of the things that we had to decide was when to do this. I never thought I was going to run for politics, any kind of elected office. So who else have we got here? Darth? It's good to see you, Darth. I'm glad you're here. That's what gets me in this fight. That's what makes me excited. So, here's to 2019 and changing the world. Happy New Year. Bye-bye.
She says, thank you for being here. To her husband, thank you for being here in the kitchen of our house, right? So that clip, that's your average, relatable, multi-million-dollar Cambridge law professor just popping a brewski. That's all that is. And Trump has been ripping her for this in his speeches, for welcoming her husband into the kitchen. Thank you for being here. She is the most inauthentic person in this race. Now, they all are. They're all inauthentic, but she's the worst. Check out these two videos. These are two unedited videos, side by side, This is after the last debate. In one of the videos, Warren's talking to a CBS reporter, and the other video, she's talking to an MSNBC reporter. We're going to play them both at the same time. Now, notice off a little bit, but then sometimes they sync up perfectly with each other. Check this out.
You know,
We've had
3
Donald
years
Trump and
now
Mitch McConnell
of
for 3
Donald
years
Trump
now.
and Mitch McConnell.
And
it was exactly 3 years ago tonight
Mitch McConnell tried
that
to
Mitch
pitch me
McConnell
off the
tried to
floor
pitch
of the
me
United
off the
States
Senate floor for reading a
letter
statement from Coretta Scott King to try to stop
a
racist from being nominated to be Attorney General of the United States. And that's when Mitch McConnell said the words that women have put on T-shirts, have embroidered on pillows, and have had tattooed on their bodies. Nevertheless, she persisted.
There are a lot of people
Right now, there are a lot of folks around the country who are really worried that this race against Donald Trump may be unwinnable.
I've been
fighting fights that are unwinnable
pretty much all
of my life.
The
Fighting
fight
to get a federal agency to protect consumers. Fighting to get the CEO of Wells Fargo held accountable. And by the way, I got him fired. And fighting to take back a Senate seat from a popular incumbent Republican. So
Amazing, right? Like that, who wants that inauthenticity? Nobody. And maybe if there's anyone with less authenticity, it'd be Pete Buttigieg, right? But those, like Buttigieg and Warren, those are the worst. These Democrats are in big trouble. We don't even have time today to talk about the policies of these people. We'll do that tomorrow, but just some 30,000-foot analysis there for you. It is full-on panic mode. I'll end here with this great line from Trump at a recent rally.
So far, I'm dreaming of those candidates. I see those candidates before my eyes every night before I go to sleep. Sometimes while I'm sleeping, I love them so. Cory Booker, Pocahontas. I've got more Indian blood in me than Pocahontas, and I have none. I mean, sadly, I have none, but I have more than she.
Oh, it's going to be fun. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to admit that I was wrong about something on Monday. Got to share a mea culpa. It was about Trump's spending proposal, his budget for 2021. Now, coming up in the next segment, we're going to talk to a guest from Open the Books. This is a group that does all that super boring work of combing through the budget. And they found a few promising things. So I want to talk about those coming up next. The biggest one is the end of the use it or lose it budgeting. But we did talk about that on Monday. That creates the perverse incentive for every bureaucracy to spend all the money that they're allocated every year, or else they're going to have their budget cut the next year, right? So you get to the end of the fiscal year, and these bureaucrats are sitting here with this pile of money they haven't spent, and then they waste it because they want to come back next year with hat in hand. We need more money. This is why 1/10 of all spending in the fiscal year, 1/10 happens in the final week of the fiscal year. Think about that. 1/10 of all government spending happens in the last week because they got to spend the money. That's got to stop. So that's good. We'll talk more about that coming up in a little bit. But I mistakenly took that as the entire story. And that was wrong. That one thing can be good and very good, but the entire budget can still be way overblown. And it is. And I was tricked a bit. Here's how I was tricked. Check out these headlines here. Reuters, Trump slashes foreign aid, cuts safety nets programs in new budget proposal. New York, Trump proposes massive cuts. Shrink government, Washington Times. NBC, Trump to propose sweeping cuts to safety net. International Business Times, Trump budget cuts funding on Medicaid, food stamps. Trump's budget cut $4.4 trillion in spending over the next 10 years. That's Fox. Wall Street Journal, Trump to propose $4.8 trillion budget with big safety net cuts, right? So we're just cutting spending left and right, slashing the budget, especially for people on food stamps and all that stuff, right? So it's headline after headline of cutting the safety nets. And I read all those and I fell for it. And I'm disappointed in myself. I apologize. It's been a while since we've talked numbers and budgets. And I forgot all the tricks that they use. I assumed that all these headlines from every major media outlet about how Trump is cutting the budget actually meant that Trump was cutting the budget. Silly me. Silly me to assume that these headlines were telling an accurate picture at all. And I didn't run it through my own rubric, which is perhaps the opposite is true. So we're being told that Trump is cutting the budget by $4 trillion. Well, perhaps the opposite is true. Perhaps Trump is increasing spending by $4 trillion, right? And you got to run everything you're told. Everything you're told in the media, you got to run through it. You got to run it through that rubric. Perhaps the opposite is true. So the opposite, the opposite of cutting $4 trillion is spending $4 trillion more. So which is closer to the truth? Sure enough, here's a chart of spending in this budget proposal from 2020 to 2030. There's a $2.15 trillion increase in domestic spending. You throw in everything else, and you're getting closer to the $4 trillion in more spending. More spending, not $4 trillion in cuts. So you're thinking, hold on, Slater. Like, what do you do with that? Right? Everywhere I read, Trump is cutting spending, and now you're telling me is increasing. Like, what the heck's going on? So what's the trick from the media? How do they get those headlines? How can they write that? So I appreciate Daniel Mitchell for the reminder here. Here's what's happening. Politicians have created a system where it's automatically assumed that there will be an increase in spending every year. They call that the baseline. So if a spending proposal for future years is anywhere under that baseline prediction, they call it a spending cut, even if the spending increases from the year prior, because they've already assumed a certain increase. And anytime there's a spending cut, of course, it's portrayed by the media as ripping the hearts out of children and shoving grandma off a cliff. So the analogy is, let's say you're on a diet. If you're on a diet, the assumption is you're gonna lose weight. So let's say you weigh 200 pounds, and you tell somebody, say, hey, I lost 2 pounds. That's great. People will assume you now weigh, how much do you weigh now? You were 200, you lost 2 pounds. Now you weigh 198 pounds, great job. That's in reality. In government land, you assume you're going to gain 5 pounds in a week. And if you only gain 3, then you can now come out and say that you've lost 2 pounds. Make sense? Of course not. It makes no sense at all because your brain doesn't work that way. Let me try this again. You gotta be a politician to even think like this. So let me try this again. So in reality, you weigh 200 pounds, you're on a diet, you lose 2 pounds, you now weigh 198 pounds. Great job. In government land, you say you're on a diet and you say, hey, I lost 2 pounds, but you actually gained weight. You assumed you would gain 5 pounds, but you only gained 3. So it's sort of like you lost 2 pounds, isn't it? No, but that's how the government works. Do you see the trick? Now here's the worst part about this. Both sides can claim victory. So the people who want more spending can, right, so the Democrats, they can get out there and complain about the draconian cuts to the budget. By the way, draconian is a funny word. The only time I ever hear it, I like etymology, so I heard that word the other day, I had to look it up. The only time I ever hear that word is when the left and Democrats use it to describe Republican spending cuts. Do you ever hear that word any other time? Draconian? Do you hear that in any other context? So the quicker the story is, back in 600 BC, the people of Athens said, hey, we want a law system and someone should write it down. How about you, Draco? So this guy Draco wrote down all the laws, and then everyone realized, oh, this guy's crazy. Like, this guy's insanely cruel. So he wrote down a law that if you steal anything, you're put to death. You die. If you steal anything, you're dead. So that's where we get the word draconian, right? So I would argue that to call an increase of spending by over $2 trillion, to call that draconian seems to be a bit of an exaggeration. But the left loves that because they can claim victory about the cuts and how mean these Republicans are. And the Republicans They like this system because they can claim victory, because they can go tell their base that they're cutting spending, which is what I got fooled on Monday, but they're not cutting spending, and claim they are, but they're not. So everyone wins. So I'm still grateful that we can get rid of the use it or lose it budgeting. That's a very good thing. But Trump still has not done the massive structural budgeting changes that we need. And we need it. I got a minute here. Let me give you one last example of how the media can spin anything they want into whatever they want. Truly, whatever happens, they can turn it into whatever they want. This is called Republicans Pounce. So whenever a Republican does something wrong, the story in the media is about the Republican doing the wrong thing. Whenever a Democrat does something wrong, the story is about Republicans pouncing on the Democrat or attacking that poor Democrat here. So the story is always about the Republican doing the wrong thing one way or the other. So there was a headline on CBS News the other day. It said, Republicans gloat over Iowa caucus meltdown. Isn't that great? So the headline wasn't, Democrats completely blow it at Iowa. The headline was about Republicans gloating about it. I bring that up here only because you just got to stop paying attention to the media. They're all a bunch of hacks, whether it comes to election coverage and analysis or budget. Complete bunch of hacks. You can't even listen to them. And that's why I'm glad there's the first. And I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk with Open the Books coming up next. We'll get a little more detail on the budget for next year. That's next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Slater Crusaders, let's keep this very, very boring talk of budgeting alive here with Adam Andrzejewski. He is the founder and CEO of OpenTheBooks.com. Adam, how are you, sir?
Great, Mike. Thanks very much for your interest in our work. Look, it's
No,
a
it's my pleasure.
target-rich environment on federal waste.
What?
And, let's just start with the $1 billion paid to dead people last year that the 20 largest federal agencies admit to. Look, those were people with federal death certificates on file, and they received overpayments, improper and mistakenly, of $1 billion just last year.
Like, I don't, like, it doesn't make sense. And like, as you said, they have, like, the federal government should know they're deceased, right? They have the documentation for that. How does that not talk to each other? How does that not work?
So, I mean, this has been such a problem going back years, and they can't get it stopped. And we put this oversight investigation up at Forbes. We disclosed this on a national basis last spring, and it has led to legislation in the United States Senate, bipartisan legislation between Senator Kennedy and Senator Carper, a Republican and a Democrat. Actually, they have to introduce a bill in the Senate to try to get it stopped. It's out of control.
I loved in the piece you wrote for Forbes the other day, you said there are 6 million active Social Security numbers for people over the age of 112. And the problem with that is, you said 6 million, the problem with that is there's only 40 people in the world over the age of 112. Like, how is that possible?
It shouldn't be possible, but it shows you what a mess the federal books are. Social Security just last year admitted to overpayments of $10 billion. And it's a stunning number, 10 million mistakenly and improperly paid that went out the door last year. Look, these federal agencies, they don't even have basic in-house financial accounting controls.
Okay, do you want to do good news or bad news for the president's 2021 budget first?
So I think the good news, you know, the first time in U.S. history we have a president that actually wrote the chapter, put it in the budget, and it's his objective to eliminate wasteful spending. Look, we agree at OpenTheBooks.com. Our honorary chairman is the former U.S. Senator Dr. Tom Coburn, and he wrote the book on the debt bomb. He believes that the national debt is the -- security threat to the future of our country. Barack Obama's former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Mullen, in 2010, in a Chamber of Commerce speech, said that the national debt is the #1 security concern of the United States military. And so when you have the president, Donald Trump, in this budget chapter, his language is that a bloated and wasteful government with duplicative programs is a threat to the future of America. It's great to have the president recognize that right off the top.
Yeah, I like that. Give me a quick, like as concise as possible for my own benefit, as concise as possible, why it's the biggest problem and it's a national security concern, the debt. Why is it such a big problem? Help me explain it to my neighbor.
So $23 trillion they're spending right now, $1 trillion over revenues every single year. And as Margaret Thatcher said, at some point you run out of other people's money to spend. And that's when the system collapses. So soon you'll have the interest payments on the national debt will be our #1 federal expenditure. It'll exceed even the amount that we appropriate for the Department of Defense.
Yeah, that's and then if interest rates ever were to go up even a little bit on all that, forget it. Let's talk about the good thing in the budget, which is the end of that, what do you call it, like the year-end spending, use it or lose it budgeting. Explain that system and how the president's going to get rid of that.
So a year ago, our auditors at openthebooks.com, we found that in the last month of the fiscal year, this is the phenomenon known as use it or lose it spending, where the federal agencies spend down their budget this year, so Congress will appropriate the same or more money for them next year. We found they spent $100 billion on federal contracting in the final 30 days of the fiscal year. It was, for instance, $4.6 million spent on lobster tail and snow crab. They spent $300 million spending down their vehicle budget on cars, trucks, snowmobiles, even golf carts. They spent $750,000. They spent $500,000 redecorating the agencies and buying furniture. They spent another $500 million on PR, public relations, advertising, and promotion. And Mike, nothing rankles taxpayers more than spending taxpayer money to convince taxpayers that we need to send them more taxpayer money.
I remember I read about the lobster tail. Who's spending any money on lobster tail in the federal government? Do you know what that is? What is that?
Well, the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, they spent down their lobster tail and snow crab budget at the end of the year. They blew out nearly $5 million. And look, we followed up with them, and they admitted that over the course of the last 18 months, they've spent over $25 million on lobster tail and snow crab.
For who?
Well, we hope it's for troops in hot zones. So we took a look at how many troops were deployed in hot zones and war zones. Because if those guys are eating snow crab and lobster tail, maybe there's a public purpose there. But they would have to be eating lobster tail and snow crab 1 out of every 2 dinners every day of the entire year for that amount of money.
Just to be clear for everyone watching, I didn't plan that exchange with Adam. I wasn't like, hey, Adam, make sure you know a lot about the snow crab. That was totally out of the blue. And you happen to know a lot about the snow crab. You guys have really covered your bases on all of this stuff to know that fact about the amount of lobster and snow crab. That is outrageous.
I think it's going to the officers, in the O clubs around the world. Okay, here's another thing, like with the Department of Defense. Look, they flunked their audit. They had 1,200 auditors. They spent $400 million. They flunked their audit. So we would feel a lot better with the increases at the DOD if they could simply pass their audit. Our auditors found $9,300 spent on a club leather chair. $1 million was spent on PBR. That's the Professional Bull Riders Association. And look, it goes on and on. We found they were purchasing coffee cups, expensive coffee cups, for $1,200. When we showcased
explain
this
that
at the Wall Street Journal,
what's the story behind that? The $1,000 coffee cups.
Air Force. So the Air Force were buying expensive, fancy coffee cups to keep the coffee warm for their fighter pilots. And here's the problem. The handles were breaking off. And every time they were cheap. Every time the handle broke off, they spent another $1,200 on a new coffee cup. This went to Chuck Grassley. He wrote an oversight letter. He's the senator from Iowa. At the time, he was head of judiciary. The Pentagon admitted to spending $350,000 on these expensive coffee cups. But here's the good news. Somebody at the Air Force came up with a fix for the broken handle. It's $6 and it uses a 3D printer.
Amazing. Okay, so how do we change the incentive for the use it or lose it? Because it makes sense in the bureaucratic system that exists to use all your money in the last week. I love the fact you guys had 1/10 of all spending is done in the final week of the year. So how do you get rid of that incentive and create a new incentive to save if you're a bureaucrat?
Well, I think you have to realign the financial incentives of the bureaucracy. Rand Paul has got a great bill in the hopper. It gets no attention. And here's what it is, and it needs attention. And people around the country need to raise their voice on this issue and demand attention. It's bonuses for the bureaucrats who cut their budget, not bonuses for those bureaucrats that spend all their money at the end of the year. It's bonuses for those that are frugal and that save some dollars.
Would that money go to the head of the bureaucracy, or would it be everyone in it? Or do you know how the bill aligns that?
So look, I think there needs to be some flexibility in how agencies spend their money. Rather than this mad push to blow it all out through the end of the year, I think there needs to be a carryover provision that you're able to carry over some dollars into the fiscal year. And I think that would help in terms of waste. U.S. Senator from Iowa, Joni Ernst, has a bill written off our oversight report. The president has showcased this bill. It's Senate Bill 1238, and it would end use it or lose it on a go-forward basis by simply mandating that you can't spend more in the final 2 months of the fiscal year. It has to be an average of the previous 10 months. That's good legislation. That should be enacted.
Okay, very good. Give us some bad news with this budget, because my understanding is, we talked about in the last segment, spending is still going up. So it's not, I mean, there's cuts from the baseline projections, but it's not an actual real cut. What's your take on all that?
So the bad news that over the course of the past 3 years, the president has signed into law budgets that spend $4.6 trillion more than revenues. And so Congress, patronage Republicans have joined Democrats for the past 3 years. 2 out of 3 years, the Republicans were in control of both chambers. They joined Democrats to drain the United States Treasury from the left. Unfortunately, the president didn't invest political capital in the spending and debt fight, and he signed those budgets. Now it's an election year, and that's why this budget is so important. The president has outlined his priorities that he's going to run for re-election on. Others can join him and run for re-election on these priorities of cutting spending, eliminating wasteful spending, stopping mistaken and improper payments, and ending use it or lose it end-of-year spending.
Okay, those are good wins, but how would you characterize it as enough?
So, it outlines a path to balance the budget over 15 years. When you're down $1 trillion, maybe that's the best we can do. Look, I think if you're not cutting 20%, you're not serious. The president has 5% cuts in this budget. Now, to be fair, our organization, from the pages of the Wall Street Journal and USA Today, said, let's just get started on a gainful first step, 5% cuts. The president has adopted that in addition to this war on waste. We applaud him for that, but we also think that over the course of time, that he can do a lot more.
Okay. I'm not going to put you on any partisan position here, but do you want to compare Trump's budget with what you think Bernie Sanders' budget would be?
Okay, so let's use CNN as the source on this. Medicare for all would drain $60 trillion from the United States Treasury. That's CNN's source on Bernie Sanders' healthcare plan, and it would raise spending to world record all-time highs. It would make the Guinness Book of World Records, no question.
Amazing. And if the government purchased that book of Guinness World Record, it would be probably $5 million a copy, knowing their incentive system. Adam Andrzejewski, go ahead.
I wanted to purchase a copy of the president's budget, and it's printed by the government office of printing. It costs $60, and so now we're printing ourselves.
That's awesome. Adam Andrzejewski, openthebooks.com. Adam, let's talk soon. I'd love it, maybe even next week, because I want to talk about your pay-to-play report that you guys put out recently, which is like just full-on corruption. So hopefully we can do that soon.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for your interest in our work.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you. Yeah, totally. Openthebooks.com. All right, beautiful. Talking about Clarence Thomas coming up next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Great job, Adam. You're the Hey, Slider Crusaders. There's a new documentary. It's in theaters right now, select theaters now. It's about Clarence Thomas. It's called Created Equal. Clarence Thomas in his own words. Check out part of the trailer here.
When I was 6, I wandered the streets by myself. You were hungry and didn't know when you'd eat. Someplace in my life, the road split off. I'd gone to the seminary. I'd gone to all-white schools. I was never going to be a part of that world. I was never going to be white. The problem is I could never go back completely to the world I came from. We're supposed to be revolutionaries. We were for anybody who's kind of in your face. I saw what I had become, lashing out at every single thing. And then I asked God that if you take anger out of my heart, I'll never hate again. And that was the beginning of the slow return to where I started.
I want my candidacy to unify our country.
I was under constant attack. You're not really black because you're not doing what we expect black people to do.
That I will nominate Judge Clarence Thomas to serve as Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
That's when all heck broke loose.
Judge Thomas began to use work situations to discuss sex.
We know exactly what's going on here. This is the wrong black guy. He has to be destroyed. You really didn't matter. What mattered was what they wanted.
So you'd still like to serve on the Supreme Court?
I'd rather die than withdraw from the process. I wanted to be able to say I lived up to my oath and did my best.
So good. Tomorrow we're going to talk to the filmmaker Michael Pack. Super excited for that. This is a perfect follow-up to AOC's comments last week when she said there's no such thing as pulling yourself up from your bootstraps. Yesterday, we had an awesome conversation with the First's contributor, Rob Smith, about this. He was at that hearing when AOC said that. He was able to share his testimony and his story right to AOC. And yesterday on our show, we were able to slow it down and talk into more detail. And it was super insightful. It's on the clips of that on my Twitter, Slater Radio on Twitter, and also the First on TV, their Twitter page. But I want to thank AOC for saying that about bootstraps, because it gives us an excuse to share stories of people who have pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and we all love those stories. Now, last week when we talked about that AOC clip, we talked about the history of that expression, pulling yourself up from your bootstraps. And she was right about part of it. It was a joke. It came from an old German legend of a man who would make up these ridiculous stories about his life. And in one of his stories, he was stuck in a swamp and he pulled himself out by pulling his own hair. And it was absurd. It's an impossibility, right? It was a joke. And it was a joke because that guy was a joke. You just make up these tall tales, these stories about his life. And everyone knew that. But that legend then came to America, and Americans changed it to he jumped over this river. There's this massive river, and the guy jumped over it by pulling on his own bootstraps. And it was also a joke. But then it became real, meaning the impossibility of doing something yourself, right? Like in the old world, the idea that you could do something yourself to improve your situation in life, that was an impossibility then, but now it's possible in the new world. So Americans uniquely embrace this idea of self-improvement and perseverance and hard work and serving others, that will result in improving your own life. So yes, in America, we can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. So yeah, AOC was right. Started out as a joke because it was an impossibility, but it became real in America. It wasn't a joke anymore. And Clarence Thomas is proof of that. Clarence Thomas had legitimate reasons to hate America. It was a lot like that Tuskegee Airman who was honored at the State of the Union last week. Clarence Thomas had reasons to hate America, and you couldn't blame him, really. At the age of 6, in blistering hot Savannah, Georgia, as they mentioned in the trailer, he wandered the streets alone while his mother worked. Grew up in black tenements with raw sewage piled up in the ditches right next to where people cooked outside. He said Savannah was hell. His grandparents took over raising him. They sent him to a Catholic school, and then he went to a seminary, and he was going to become a Catholic priest. But then he saw so much hate that he became it. And we often do that, right? We see something we hate, and then we involuntarily become that thing. And the more hate he saw, the more hateful he became. Someone sent him a note that said, "I like Martin Luther King, dead." When MLK was shot, he heard a seminary student celebrate. And then the race riots, Robert Kennedy assassination in '68, Clarence Thomas he fell off the deep end. He became full of rage, full of anger. He said, "For the first time in my life, racism and race explained everything." He said it became a religion. I shoved aside Catholicism, and it was all about race. How many people today are still in that mode? How many people today still think that life is entirely about race? How many people today are still preaching that life is all about race? And it becomes a religion. That was Clarence Thomas. He joined the Black Marxist revolutionaries. He was an activist, celebrated the calls for killing police officers. He went back home, and he saw his grandfather, the man who raised him, his Vietnam vet brother, and they were embarrassed. He said, "What have you become? Why are you so angry?" But he doubled down, went to Yale Law School, but because of affirmative action, everyone assumed at that time that if you were black at one of these top schools, then you weren't actually a good student. You were just there because of affirmative action. So no one hired him. The man's a genius, but no one hired him except for a Republican. And he had to take the job. He had a wife and baby to support. So he moved to Missouri. He was an assistant attorney general. And he said, at that time, my thinking was that all black people were political prisoners. He said that was the level of sophistication of his political thought. He said that's how he looked at the criminal justice system, that all black people were political prisoners. And then he saw the justice system. And he realized that the people there, black, white, everyone, the people involved in the system were there for just reasons. He said it was a road to Damascus experience. Reference to Paul. Paul was on the road to Damascus. He spent his whole life killing Christians, and then Jesus came to him, and then Paul became probably the greatest champion of the gospel in history, right? He was on the road to Damascus. And so was Clarence Thomas when he had that conversion. And it was then when he became a conservative. And it was at that very moment when he was hated by the left, right? He was the left, and then instantly became hated by the left. And the documentary spends a good amount of time on that 1991 confirmation battle. If you weren't there for it, it was a lot like the Kavanaugh one. Now, he said the racism that he's received in his life, he said, growing up, he was told it's going to be that bigot in the pickup truck, or it's going to be the Klansman, it's going to be that rural sheriff who's going to rough you up. He said, but it turns out that through his life, he said the biggest impediment to his success, the biggest impediment was the modern day liberal. Check out this clip.
Well, it's stereotypes draped in sanctimony and self-congratulation. There's different sets of rules for different people. If you criticize a black person who's more liberal, you're a racist. Whereas if you can do whatever to me or to now Ben Carson, and that's fine because you're not really black because you're not doing what we expect black people to do. It's a tactic, and when people see it being successful, they don't realize they're going to be the next ones in the Tower of London.
So racist is it's a term just to use to keep people in line. Keep black people in line, keep white people in line. But really, Clarence Thomas, it's a rags to riches story. It's about redemption. It's a story about changing your attitude. As Clarence Thomas would say, to put your actions more in line with God's will and not get distracted by people trying to take you down, right? And look at how anger almost destroyed him. Anger will destroy you. It'll destroy your life. Whatever or whoever you're angry at, you've got to root that out of your heart. It's going to ruin your entire life. It almost did with Clarence Thomas. Alienated him from his family, took him away from his mission, took him away from his faith. and it was taking him away from the truth. It consumed him until he couldn't take it anymore. And he stopped being angry. He just stopped. He forgave. He woke up. It's funny how the term woke has been taken by the left to imply that the racists, you and I, like we're asleep and we need to wake up to our bigotry and become woke. But Clarence Thomas would say he woke up and realized that the course of his life, as Rob Smith said yesterday, the course of his life was up to him and his choices, no one else or nothing else. He woke up out of his anger and he was now actively making good decisions in his life to do good. And he did that all the way to the Supreme Court. So dare I say, a boy who grew up in poverty-stricken Savannah to become a justice of the Supreme Court, that's a man who pulled himself up from his bootstraps. We're going to talk with the filmmaker on this tomorrow. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Have a great day.